To the players and the people you came to hear with their expertise today. Our keynote speaker has come a long way to be with us. William Cohen is chairman and CEO of the Cohen Group based in Washington, D.C., which assists companies around the world in their business through better strategies and execution. He's no stranger to Indonesia. He's been here many times. He loves his country. Throughout his public service career, Mr. Cohen has been a leader in environmental issues. That's been one of his passions. His time in government was capped by his cabinet position as Secretary of Defense in the Clinton administration. And now he's helping us defend endangered animals. Mr. William Cohen.
Thanks very much, and it's really a pleasure for me to be here today to discuss the private sector's role in preserving biodiversity and natural habitats in Indonesia. I thought I might perhaps give you a little bit of background of my experience. As was announced, I did serve as Secretary of Defense, and you say, well, what's that got to do with biodiversity? But I would go back to my experience as a very young politician. I was the mayor of the third largest city in Maine. It sounds very impressive. Population 38,000 people. It tells you a lot about the state of Maine in terms of it being a very rural population, very rural state. Mostly trees and not too many people, maybe 1.1, 1.2 million people at best. But while I was this very young mayor, I saw firsthand what was taking place in terms of how we were, in fact, damaging our environment. We have a river called the Penobscot River running right through the city. And what were we doing? We were pouring chemical waste, hospital waste, raw sewage into this river, thinking out of sight, out of mind. Well, it didn't go out of sight, it didn't go out of mind because it killed all the fish in the river. It made the water undrinkable. It made the river unswimmable. And so working with the Environmental Protection Agency in Washington and working with the local business community, we were able to bring back that river. And there was a tradition in the White House that the first salmon ever caught in the Penobscot River always was presented to the President of the United States. Well, that ceased for quite a few years until the fish came back and the salmon came back, and we went back to the White House saying, thanks to the environmental protection laws, thanks to the cooperation coming from the business community, we now have clean air, we have clean water, we have an environment that we can truly be proud of. So going from there, I decided I was going to run for Congress. And I ran for Congress by walking across the state of Maine, all the way from the state of New Hampshire all the way to Canada. It was 650 miles. And during that walk, I wanted to find out how people who live very close to the land, how they were able to have jobs on the one hand, and yet still have a sustainable, livable environment which they were so proud of. And so I conducted that 650-mile walk, and I learned that there were logging activities taking place, clear cutting, and I came to the conclusion this was not in our best interest in terms of how to go about producing jobs, but not taking and managing that timberland prudently. And then there was a big hydro dam that was going to be completed. And it was a favorite of Senator Edward Muskie. And it was called the Dickey Lincoln Hydroelectric Dam. And I came out in opposition to that because I discovered that we would have destroyed vast amounts of wildlife, displacing thousands and thousands of animals and wildlife, in order to create a few hundred jobs, temporary construction jobs, and then only produce peak power. I said, this does not seem like a proper trade-off. And I was able to persuade the people of Maine and my colleagues in the United States Senate that we should be opposed to that. And so as a result of that, again, that made me very sensitive to the issues involved in how do we create jobs but do so in a way that protects the environment. And then going on to the Department of Defense. You would think, what's the Department of Defense got to do with preservation of species or habitat? The Defense Department is the biggest consumer of energy in our country. And I was determined to say that we needed to go green. The Army, in addition to wearing the color green, needed to go green. And we needed to adopt habits of cutting back on our consumption. And also being very sensitive to our training areas. That we had to make sure that as we expanded the areas for military training, that we didn't trespass and tread upon very sensitive ecosystems and endangered species. And so the Defense Department became very concerned about how we were going to do that. And then some of you may not be aware of this, but a short time ago there were a group of retired generals who filed a report. And the report
logging activities taking place in their country.
Climate change.
And I came to the conclusion this will not end our best interests in terms of how
Actually, it's a threat to
producing jobs, not taking advantage of.
And what they were pointing to were when you have this kind of vast
And then there was a big hydro trend that was going to be
areas under constant.
it was a favor of assembly and
and they then migrate to areas that are then contested by others saying stay
I
out.
came out of opposition to that. They discovered that we would have destroyed
I
vast
saw that not only at the international level,
displays
but
like
just
thousands and
glimpses
thousands of
during Hurricane Katrina.
in order to
Some of you may
create
recall
a
it
few
took place
100 jobs, temporary construction jobs, and then only
flooded New Orleans and other areas. And there was a scene in which you had people fleeing New Orleans, trying to get to the neighboring town across the bridge. Guess what? The police and the sheriffs were lined up on this side of the bridge saying, don't come across. So that was an example at a local level of what can take place when we expand that to talk about it at the international level. And that's why our retired generals said we have to be serious about climate change because it has a very substantial national security threat to all of us. So I mentioned that by way of background to say that's the reason I have been involved in these issues. I have been concerned that we are trustees of the environment, that we have to produce jobs. That's something we do very well, are doing very well here in Indonesia. You all know the numbers. The growth rate of 6.5%, and those who are advocating or hoping to go to 6.8, and maybe eventually 7%, that's all well and good. The question is, how can you do this, creating the jobs, promoting more job creation, at the same time, not really endangering something that's quite fragile and very important, not only to Indonesia, but to much of the world as well. So I want to be here today to talk about the changes that are taking place now as the head of the Cohen Group, consulting group. And we talk to many major corporations who do business globally. And I can tell you there has been a significant change of attitude on the part of major companies who have become more and more sensitive to the need to conduct their business, to expand their activities, but to do so in a way that is environmentally friendly, and to take into account the fragile ecosystems. They're doing it why? Number one, consumers are more informed. Consumers, thanks to this little device that we have in our hands, carry around, allows the consumer to be aware of everything that's going on everywhere. And so they're becoming much more sensitive to companies who produce either products or provide services that are inconsistent with good, sound environmental practices. So that's one reason to say the change is taking place. The public is becoming much more aware, and the public can vote. Not only they can vote with their feet, but they can vote with their wallets by deciding they would rather do business or buy products from companies that have this kind of ethical concern for protecting and preserving important ecosystems in their world. Second, I think there's a realization that as globalization continues to accelerate, that there is a fundamental interdependence between the public sector, the private sector, and NGOs. We can't operate with one without the other. I'll give you an example on this, that it's not only, I think it was Justice Holmes who said that we look back to the past, not only out of desire, out of necessity. And that is true here as well, that the public and the private sectors have to cooperate, not only because it's a desirable thing to do, but it's necessary. Number one, the public sector depends upon the private sector to what? To create jobs.